Imagine an empire spanning 11 time zones, commanding 300 million souls, armed with 50,000 nuclear warheads, yet crumbling under its own weight like a termite-riddled colossus. This was the Soviet Union in 1980, a mathematical monstrosity hemorrhaging $8 billion annually on proxy wars in Angola, Ethiopia, and Afghanistan. Its central planning a rigid choke point, strangling innovation while breadlines stretched for blocks. We were told containment would save us. Détente, the polite fiction that coexistence was possible. But Reagan saw the truth. It was slow suicide, a debt cycle identical to Rome's debased denarius or Britain's imperial overstretch in 1914, when hubris met arithmetic annihilation. The numbers don't lie and they scream extinction. By 1985, Moscow's hard currency reserves had evaporated to $5 billion, down from $30 billion a decade prior, as oil prices, their lifeblood, plummeted 70% thanks to Saudi pumps wide open. Factories idled at 60% capacity, harvests rotted in fields for lack of trucks, and the ruble's black market value hit 1.1 with the dollar underground. This wasn't bad luck. It was historical determinism encoded in Marxism's fatal flaw. State confiscation of wealth ignores human incentives, guaranteeing collapse. Empires don't fall from invasion. They implode from internal entropy, just as the Ottomans bled dry in the Balkans or Spain's gold-fueled inflation in the 1600s. Reagan inherited Jimmy Carter's whimpering surrender, inflation at 13.5%, gold at $850 an ounce, hostages rotting in Tehran. The mainstream media peddled parity myths, whispering the bear was invincible. But we, the clear-eyed realists, knew better. The USSR's $5 trillion GDP masked a rotting core, military spending at 25% of output, triple ours, propping up 20 ungrateful satellites from Cuba to Vietnam. Every tank rolling off the line was a loan from future generations, now due with interest. Détente wasn't diplomacy. It was deferred annihilation, letting them tunnel under our defenses while we dozed. Flash forward. We're repeating the script today. US. Debt at $36 trillion, interest payments eclipsing defense budgets, BRICS nations eyeing our choke points like the Malacca Strait. China's shadow banking bubble mirrors Soviet overinvestment, hemorrhaging trillions in ghost cities. They tell us globalization will save us. Lies from Davos elites too cowardly to face the math. Reagan proved sustainability is impossible without aggression. Passivity invites the reaper. We stand at the cliff's edge again. Empires don't negotiate with physics, they defy it or die. The Soviet doom wasn't mystery, it was certainty, a warning etched in red ink for anyone paying attention. But amid this red ink apocalypse, Reagan didn't flinch. He pivoted to the ultimate hidden asset, a ruthless economic strangulation doctrine buried in National Security Decision Directive 75, or NSDD 75, the classified blueprint for "we win, they lose." Forged in 1983, this wasn't feel-good diplomacy. It was a trident of financial terror designed to bleed Moscow dry without firing a shot. First prong, slash their tech pipeline. The Soviets stole 60% of their hard tech from the West, computers, semiconductors, oil rigs. But Reagan's covert ops, like the farewell dossiers from French intelligence, flooded them with sabotaged gear, while COCOM export controls choked the rest. Billions in black market deals evaporated overnight, leaving their MiG factories grinding on 1970s scrap. Second prong, eviscerate their gas and oil cash cow, the $100 billion lifeline funding, 70% of hard currency. Reagan twisted Saudi King Fahd's arm in '85, pump crude at $10 a barrel, flood the glut, watch Moscow's revenues crater 75% from $32 billion to $8 billion annually. OPEC quotas shattered. The ruble devalued 400% on black markets, forcing bread rationing in Leningrad. This was no accident. It was engineered hegemony, Washington, whispering ultimatums in Riyadh while the Kremlin starved. Third prong. The Reagan Doctrine's asymmetric blitzkrieg, pump $3 billion into Mujahideen stingers in Afghanistan, Contras in Nicaragua, UNITA in Angola at a 1-to-8 cost ratio to Soviet expenditures. They hemorrhaged $8 billion yearly on quagmires. We spent pennies to ignite insurgencies that tied down 25% of their army. Why obsess over this? Because elites in Foggy Bottom and Langley knew the math. USSR military spending at 27% of GDP couldn't match our 6% without implosion. SDI, Star Wars, sealed it. A $1 trillion bluff, leaked blueprints forcing Andropov to divert 40% more rubles to space defense, bankrupting R&D on actual weapons. Trillions in phantom costs materialized from thin air, Gorbachev inheriting a fiscal black hole. Mainstream media spun it as Gorbachev's reforms, but we know this was predatory resource denial. The hidden asset turning Soviet hubris into irreversible confiscation of their own future. Reagan didn't negotiate. He weaponized markets, exposing Marxism's Achilles heel. Central planning crumbles when cash flows cease. Flash to today, BRICS hoards $7 trillion in gold and reserves, eyeing dollar choke points, but the Reagan TRIAD lurks as our salvation. Cut China's tech imports via tariffs, flood their oil markets with US shale at $40 a barrel, arm proxies from Taiwan to the Sahel at pennies on the dollar. Elites peddle cooperation because they fear the aggression. They whisper détente while Beijing builds ghost fleets. But Reagan revealed the equation. Control the asset flows and empires kneel. Washington's obsession wasn't ideology. It was arithmetic annihilation, trillions extracted silently. This hidden weapon didn't just crush communism. It proved might makes right when debt cycles demand it. The Kremlin collapsed not from glasnost, but from empty vaults. Our bold move, their extinction. The elites hid NSDD-75 for decades, fearing we'd demand repeats against new bears. But now, with US debt at $36 trillion and interest gobbling $1 trillion yearly, we need this playbook. Saudi pumps primed, export bans locked, proxies funded. It's the only asset-flipping doom to dominance. They thought communism invincible. Reagan showed it's just bad math waiting for a predator. We hold the triad, ignore it, and we're the hemorrhaged ones. Reagan's masterstroke wasn't born in a vacuum. It echoed the timeless playbook of empires that survived by strangling rivals' lifelines, proving history's iron law. Debt-laden hegemons shatter under resource denial, just as the USSR did. Flashback to World War I, when Britain's naval blockade didn't just starve Germany's U-boat wolfpacks, it methodically choked 75% of Berlin's imports, spiking food prices 300% and forcing the Kaiser to sue for peace in 1918 after 750,000 civilian deaths from hunger alone. No grand invasion, just arithmetic annihilation, mirroring Reagan's oil glut that slashed Soviet revenues by $24 billion yearly, rotting their economy from the core. Historians gloss over it as naval supremacy, but we see the pattern. Control the choke points, watch the enemy hemorrhage. This isn't anomaly, it's determinism etched in blood across centuries. Spain's 17th century golden age imploded when Dutch privateers and English fleets blockaded their Atlantic convoys, confiscating silver shipments worth trillions in today's dollars and inflating their currency into oblivion. GDP contracted 50% in a generation, just like Moscow's 1980s black hole. Fast forward to Truman's NSC-68 in 1950, the original rollback Bible. U.S. embargoes on Soviet bloc tech starved Stalin's bomb programs, forcing resource cannibalization that weakened their entire war machine. Reagan simply scaled it, NSDD-75 as NSC-68 on steroids, denying computers and oil to replicate the Dutch sea beggars' guerrilla commerce warfare. Empires don't reform. They repeat cycles until predators pounce. Rome's fall in 476 AD offers the blueprint. Overextended legions bleeding 40% of the treasury on barbarian frontiers, debased denarii fueling hyperinflation at 1,000%, while Gaul and Britain seceded under economic siege. The USSR was Rome Redux, 25% GDP militarized, satellites like Cuba sucking $6 billion annually in subsidies, harvests lost to inefficiency as Reagan's proxies ignited brushfires. Gorbachev's perestroika, desperate debasement, printing rubles until they bought a loaf for 100. Historical proof screams, rigid systems ignore incentives, inviting fiscal reapers. Britain's 1945 surrender of empire followed the same script. Post-WWI debt at 250% GDP, US Lend-Lease cut off, forcing liquidation of $30 billion in assets, hegemony yielded without a shot. Today we're replaying 1980s Moscow, $36 trillion US debt servicing at $1.2 trillion yearly, BRICS gold hoards mirroring Soviet reserves, ghost economies in Xi's China hemorrhaging $10 trillion in bad loans. Elites peddle multipolarity like 1970s détente, blind to the cycle. America as late Rome, choke points like Taiwan Strait, ripe for denial. Reagan validated the antidote. Weaponize markets, as Britain did to Spain or FDR to Japan pre-Pearl Harbor, with oil embargoes cratering their fleet expansion. This isn't nostalgia, it's predictive math. Empires averaging 250-year lifespans collapse 80% from internal rot accelerated by external bleed. The mainstream historians sanitize it as inevitable thaw, but we know. Reagan orchestrated the pattern, turning Soviet hubris into irreversible entropy. From Habsburg bankruptcies in 1557 to Ottoman capitulations in 1875, debt cycles demand aggression. Seize the flows or face extinction. Washington's obsession with NSDD-75 echoed these ghosts because survival hinges on repetition. China eyes our shale revolution. Russia covets Arctic gas. History dictates we flood their markets or become the next cautionary tale. Reagan didn't invent the wheel. He rolled it over communism's grave, proving might makes right when arithmetic aligns. Ignore the Ivy Tower myths of moral victories. This was raw resource realism, validated by every fallen colossus. Debt chokes, denial kills. Reagan's triad wasn't luck. It was history's echo chamber demanding we listen or perish. Now the brutal binary. Reagan's triad wasn't optional. It was aggression or extinction, a do-or-die ultimatum against the KGB globalist axis plotting our financial enslavement from Lubyanka to Havana. Brezhnev's Politburo weren't ideologues, they were resource vampires, funneling $50 billion yearly into Cuba's black hole and Africa's proxy meat grinders, tunneling under NATO's flanks while Carter's appeasers handed them parity on a silver platter. Inaction in 1981 meant Soviet subs off New York by 1990, their $2 trillion war machine, subsidized by our grain exports, choking the Atlantic lifeline. Reagan issued the edict, NSDD-75s, we win, they lose, or watch Marxism metastasize into irreversible hegemony, our dollar confiscated for rubles, sovereignty auctioned to Moscow's oligarchs. The enemy was clear, a sclerotic empire commanding 40% of global nukes, eyeing Persian Gulf oil as their next confiscation prize, with Andropov greenlighting SS-20 missiles pointed at Bonn. Détente? A suicide pact. Soviets spent $15 billion rigging 84 Olympics boycotts and arming Sandinistas to interdict our Panama Canal choke point. Reagan flipped the script, arm Afghan Mujahideen with 2,500 Stingers at $500K apiece, detonating $50 billion in Soviet tanks and helos, flood OPEC with Saudi crude, slashing their forex from 32B to 5B, ban pipeline tech, idling Siberian gas fields worth trillions. Gorbachev's glasnost was no thaw, it was capitulation, perestroika a desperate debasement as bread riots loomed and satellites like Poland bolted for the exits. Consequences of hesitation. Financial slavery on steroids. Imagine 1990s America as East Germany, Wall Street nationalized, gold reserves shipped to Yakutsk. Reagan's delay would have handed Brezhnev the Malacca Strait equivalent, Arctic sea lanes, locking our Europe trade in ice. Today it's China-Russia 2.0, BRICS $5 trillion swap lines bypassing SWIFT, Xi's Navy seizing Taiwan's chips, 90% of advanced semis, Putin's hypersonics nullifying our carrier groups. Beijing's $60 trillion debt bomb mirrors, Moscow's ghost cities hemorrhaging $20 trillion, but inaction lets them hoard African rare earths and Arctic gas, turning our shale revolution into a sideshow. Elites in Davos whisper engagement, fearing the ultimatum. We flood their oil with Permian at 30 barrel, tariff Foxconn to rubble, fund Uyghur proxies at 110 cost, or kiss sovereignty goodbye. This is zero-sum geopolitics. They strike choke points, we bleed, we deny flows, they shatter. Reagan's playbook forced Gorbachev's arms treaties, slashing 4,000 warheads because the math screamed extinction, Soviet GDP growth at 2% by 90, hyperinflation at 2,000%. Enemies don't negotiate equity, they exploit weakness. Washington's deep state buried NSDD-75 fearing populist repeats, but BRICS ultimatums demand it. Russia's Wagner in Mali seizing gold mines, China's belt choking our Indo-Pacific. Binary choice. Predatory rollback or vassalage, dollar debased to yuan peg. Farms foreclosed for Beijing agribusiness. Reagan crushed without invasion because he embraced might makes right, turning their overstretch into our windfall. History's reaper doesn't pause for summits. It harvests the passive. Today, $36 trillion U.S. debt servicing rivals Pentagon budgets, interest alone $1.5 trillion by 2027, echoing Soviet 27% militarization. China eyes Hawaii as their Cuba. Inaction means confiscation of our tech hegemony, extinction of the American century. Reagan's warning echoes: arm the insurgents, crash the commodities, export the entropy, or become the hemorrhaged empire. The Politburo blinked because we issued the ultimatum first. Hesitate now and Putin-Xi laughs last. Our vaults empty, flags lowered in irreversible surrender. Aggression isn't choice, it's survival arithmetic. Act or be annexed. The stakes couldn't be starker. Reagan's invisible triad, NSDD-75's economic noose, Saudi oil floods cratering Soviet cash, proxy bleed-outs at pennies on their billions, didn't just crush communism. It handed us the ultimate blueprint against today's debt-doomed challengers, proving that empires don't collapse from moral decay alone, but from predators who weaponize arithmetic annihilation. We face the same red ink reaper now. US. Debt spiraling to $40 trillion by 2027, interest payments devouring $1.7 trillion annually, eclipsing the entire Pentagon while BRICS nations hoard $8 trillion in gold and reserves, plotting to snap our dollar choke points from the South China Sea to the Arctic melt. China's $65 trillion shadow debt mirrors Moscow's fatal overstretch, ghost cities and bad loans hemorrhaging trillions, yet Xi's navy builds 400-ship hegemony, Russia's hypersonics covert Alaskan flanks, echoing Brezhnev's SS-20s aimed at our heartland. Ignore Reagan's playbook, and we're the next Soviet husk, sovereignty confiscated, farms foreclosed to Beijing agribusiness, Wall Street a UN casino. This isn't abstract terror, it's personal ruin staring you in the face. Your 401k, vaporized in hyperinflation as BRICS swap lines bypass SWIFT, debasing the dollar 50% overnight like Gorbachev's ruble at 5,000 to 1. Your home? Repossessed in the Great Reset fire sale, elites in Davos auctioning America to sovereign funds while you queue for digital rations. They, the globalist architects and Washington appeasers, whisper sustainable development and multipolar peace, the same detente lies that nearly gifted Carter the century to KGB vampires. But we know, passivity invites extinction, financial slavery where your grandkids pledge to Putin-Xi hybrid overlords, U.S. shale fields nationalized as war reparations. Reagan revealed the hidden asset because elites feared we'd demand repeats. Flood Chinese oil with Permian at 25 barrel, tariff Huawei to oblivion, arm Taiwanese guerrillas and Sahel insurgents at 1:10 cost ratios, starving their $100 trillion BRICS bubble before it bursts on our throats. History's determinism is merciless. Every over-leveraged hegemon from Habsburg Spain to Ottoman capitulations shattered under resource denial, and Reagan's aggression flipped our near surrender into total victory without a single Marine boot in Red Square. Today, the ultimatum blares louder. Deploy the triad or face irreversible confiscation, your savings, your freedoms, your nation's soul. BRICS isn't alliance, it's Axis, Wagner Merck seizing African rare earths, 80% of our EV supply. China's Belt Road debt traps encircling Indo-Pacific bases, turning Diego Garcia into their Cuba. Elites bury NSDD-75 in classified vaults because it exposes their game. They profit from managed decline, shorting America while hedging in yuan. But you, the viewer, hold the power to demand rollback, to force Congress to prime Saudi pumps, ban Siberian gas tech, fund the Mujahideen of tomorrow from Xinjiang to Donbass proxies, flipping the script on Moscow's quagmires. Prepare, because the plan hinges on us piercing the mainstream fog. Stock gold beyond BRICS hoards, hedge with shale royalties, learn the asymmetric arts. History proves the proactive survive, the passive are harvested. Reagan crushed without invasion by embracing might makes right, turning Soviet trillions into our trillion-dollar peace dividend. Hesitate, and confiscation cascades, entitlements gutted, borders erased, your blood and treasure fueling Xi's century. This warning isn't hyperbole, it's mathematical certainty, empires averaging 250 years before entropy claims them, accelerated by enemies we refuse to bleed. The Kremlin imploded because Reagan acted first. BRICS awaits our pivot or our grave. You have the blueprint. Ignore it at your peril or rise as the predator denying their doom. The collapse clock ticks. Will you wield the TRIAD or become its victim? Your future hangs on this aggression. Act now. Extinction isn't negotiable.